Scrapped ideas, unreleased cards that we were never meant to see, and early concepts of existing cards that you won't even recognize. Today we're taking a look at every card that Clash Royale killed, even some that technically did make it, but were a completely different card when they started out. Starting with the Lava Golem. This was a card that was discovered chilling in the game files in April 2018 with this image. Now, this was very likely just a placeholder image, something they whipped up in 5 minutes to test it in the game, but this is what it would look like in the arena. It was like a ground lava hound per its appearance, and this golem spawned from the ground, or at least went into the ground at some point. There was like a crater that would open up full of lava. And I'm not just assuming all of this, its in-game description read, Golem spirits live deep under the ground, but they're back to the surface to steal building materials. It also looks like instead of walking, they may have rolled. If you look at some of the in-game sprites, it definitely seems like they launched forward and rolled to a target and maybe spit out something from their mouths. I don't know. Sadly though, this is just one of those cool concepts that we never heard of again. Spears. The spears had a description which read, toss a pile of goblin spears onto the enemies. So this was basically going to be like the arrows, but with spears instead of the arrows. This sounds like it could have been a card that was tested for the goblin journey, but it never happened, I guess. I remember seeing a concept for this a few years back, but maybe it just wasn't that effective, and unfortunately we don't know anything else about the card. Giant Minion. The giant minion was a large minion with tiny wings that was hovering. Hovering just meant that it was both air and ground, so it had the abilities of flying troops, but it could also be attacked by ground troops. Based on the only picture we have of this giant minion, it looks like it spawned some kind of mites. We may never know what exactly it did, but the giant minion would be scrapped and inspire two different troops in Clash of Clans, the Super Minion and the Yeti, which makes perfect sense considering the mites look very similar. So it's certainly possible that the giant minion was supposed to be like a Yeti in Clash Royale, except it was a minion and it was hovering. Flower. Yes, a literal flower, and this is the only concept image we have of that. Now, even though we have no idea what it did, it does look like one of those fly trap plants, and in games, it typically eats characters or traps them. You know, if Plants vs. Zombies taught me anything, it can't be good for anything that's in front of the plant. There is no information on this goblin here, but I was thinking most likely what he did was reset the plant or something to make it chomp again. I don't know. Definitely one of the more goofy ones in this video. Ice Wizard Tower. The Ice Wizard Tower was exactly what it sounds like, a wizard tower from Clash of Clans, but with an ice wizard on top, so its shots would slow down troops and deal a little bit of damage. It's kind of like the Ice Wizard, but on a tower. This was supposed to come out in 2016, and it was going to be the first legendary building. However, that didn't happen because it was too defensive and stopped everything, leading to matches being too slow. And at the time, they were trying to speed up the game, not make it slower. According to SuperCell, this would eventually inspire the Bomb Tower, which was similar in some ways, but totally different in mechanics. Hologram Tower. This was a card that developers were playing around with in 2018, and it was essentially a decoy tower. You drop it anywhere and troops would go toward it, but then it would disappear when they got there. It didn't look like it did anything, so one can assume this was probably 1 or 2 elixir. And it was just meant to distract stuff, kind of like the totem spell in Clash of Clans. Back in 2023, these images were found of assets labeled as decoy towers. However, this was 5 years later, so I'm not 100% sure if these had anything to do with the Hologram Tower. Royal Army, also known as Royal Squad in some cases, was a card that was a combination of the Knight and Archers. In the Art of SuperCell book, it explains that they wanted to add a card that combined melee and range, so they took a Knight and 2 Archers and it became the Royal Army. Its in-game description read, 1 soldier and 2 soldieresses. Now, if this card concept sounds oddly familiar, that's because yes, it did inspire a current card, the Rascals. While the mechanics of the card were good, SuperCell wanted something with original characters, so the Royal Army became the Rascals, and this is one of the earlier concepts of what they envisioned these original characters as. Neutral Wizard. This wizard, which likely had a different name but was labeled as Neutral Wizard, was the wizard that was in the spot where King Towers would normally be. Back in the development days, there were no king towers, instead a wizard. We know very little of him, but we do know that he shot fireballs at enemies, and at some point during the match, his book and hat fell, and he could also get knocked out. I know this isn't technically a card that we could have played, but I thought it was a cool mention anyway. Sneaky Archers, also known as Elite Archers back then, was found in the game files in late 2017. They were very similar to the ones from Clash of Clans, and when you consider that those were also added in the same year, one can assume these were just the same troop in a different game. With that said, its mechanics would have been similar. A archer that is initially invisible when spawned, and then for a few seconds they can't be targeted. Now, even though this seems to be a very early version of the Magic Archer, as some believe, I'm gonna have to say it wasn't that. The Sneaky Archer has much more in common with the modern day Archer Queen, which is likely where that mechanic was borrowed from. Dark Elixir Collector. Fair warning, this one has the most speculation out of anything in this video simply because of the lack of stuff we know about it, but yeah, it's interesting nonetheless. So when Evolutions came out, a ton of references to Dark Elixir were found in the game files, including the Dark Elixir cost on the card's border, references to a Dark Elixir collector, and the animation for it when it generated one. This led many to assume that at some point Evolutions were gonna cost Dark Elixir to deploy, and so there may have been a Dark Elixir version of the collector. However, Evolutions ended up being a per cycle thing, so a new currency never happened and there was no need for the Dark Elixir collector. Royale Mashine, spelled with an S. That's not a misspelling, that's how it was spelled. Probably one of my favorite unreleased cards here. The Royale Mashine was a machine that kind of looks like the Master Builder built it, if you know what I mean. And it had a spinning crown, and I assume it shot cannonballs. It's hard to tell what the spinning crown did, but we do know that at some point it turned into a Super Tesla Tower, and that it was a scrapped champion. So most likely when you activated its ability is when it turned into that tower. The Tesla looks like it's dealing chain damage. It could also be doing the same area damage as the evil Tesla currently does. And it is possible that this ended up inspiring the Goblin machine as well, though just the machine aspect, because mechanically they are nothing alike. The Last Lavapup. If that sounds familiar, that's because yes, it was a card inspired by one of those old Clash of Clans commercials called The Legend of the Last Lavapup, which is about a Lavapup who got the Tell All in a battle they thought was a lost cause. So, you know, the Last Lavapup was the little hero of the day. Anyway, story aside, this card was supposed to be a 0 elixir card. Yeah. No costs. And I assume it was like this tiny Lavapup that could deal some damage in the right circumstances. However, according to developers, they scrapped it because the card felt too mandatory. Like every cycle deck would carry it, and it would add too much value to any deck. Hooded Gang. The Hooded Gang is probably one of the most mysterious unreleased cards in this list because there isn't much known about it, and its artwork is kind of weird. This was leaked in 2018, and it was supposedly a legendary card judging by the shape of the original asset. I'm not sure what to take out of this image, but maybe it spawned 3 bandits, which is what most people assumed, and that would have been pretty busted. Or maybe they were going to introduce the bandits family, you know, like her sisters or her friends or something. And that would have been like the Hooded Gang. I don't know, this is all just speculation, and unfortunately we never heard of the Hooded Gang again. Dark Mirror. The Dark Mirror was supposed to be a mirror card, except it was dark, so it had slightly different mechanics. According to developers, it would have mirrored your opponent's last played card. However, there were some issues that stopped them from continuing this concept. Like, what if your opponent played a card right as you play the Dark Mirror? It would have led to accidentally mirroring the wrong card. They tried to add a lock mechanic to it, where it locked in the card it was going to mirror. However, according to them, the card was difficult to use and very niche anyway, so it didn't make the cut. Gunner. The Gunner was a scrapped card that was using the same model as a prince, but instead of being on a horse with a lance, he had 2 pistols, and he would just walk around and shoot them both simultaneously. You know, like in the Western movies where some dude is dual wielding pistols and he somehow has crazy accuracy. There is very little known about the Gunner, but we do know that it was supposed to be a card release in 2018. Master Builder. All the way back in 2017, an asset of the Master Builder was found casually chilling in the game files. This was just a reused asset from Clash of Clans, but it did have an in-game description which read, summons more machines with each stage. Zappy, then Zappies, then Sparky, then Mega Knight/Flying Machine. It's unknown if this was a permanent card or just for a challenge, but it sounds ridiculously OP. I'm gonna put my bets on maybe this having something to do with the release of the Builder base in Clash of Clans that came out the same year. So maybe there was like some kind of special challenge, I'm not sure. But fast forward to 2025, the Master Builder would finally be added to Clash Royale with his entire battle machine. However, this one is exclusive to Merge Tactics. He is a ruler that you cannot play. They may have borrowed the idea of the Master Builder being in the game, but I don't think this is the same card. Bomb card. This is not an official name, just something I gave it based on looks. I mean, look at it, man. I guess you could also call it like a bomb barrel. This was a skeleton who rode inside a barrel and shot bombs or cannonballs. Very little is known about it, but it looks like it eventually morphed into the Dart Barrel, which is the Dart Goblin riding a flying barrel, and then that became the Flying Machine. It does also look like it could have inspired the Cannon Cart, but I'm not sure about that one because I think the Cannon Cart was inspired by its Clash of Clans counterpart. Whatever it turned out to be, if anything at all, the bomb cart never made it. Beta Minions. The beta minions would have been exactly what they are in Clash of Clans, long-range minions. In fact, this was confirmed in its leaked in-game description that read, a pair of long-range tough minions. This card was being prototyped for its release in 2020. However, the concept of introducing minions once again felt very unoriginal, so the beta minions, together with an early concept of a singular skeleton dragon that threw a bomb, ended up inspiring the creation of the skeleton dragons. Surprise gift. This was a card called The Gift, where it gave you a random card. It was kind of like opening a Mario Kart cube in the middle of a match. You had no idea what you were gonna get, and that was the beauty of it, I guess. It does sound like it may have also inspired the idea of the Santa Hog and the presents it dropped, where it deployed random spells, but the gift spell was a bit different in regards to how it worked. However, according to a Radio Royale podcast episode in 2017, it sounds like this was a joke, so it may have never been a serious card. Charger. Another card that was supposed to release in 2018 was the Charger, which was a bowler with a helmet on and did one long-range dash, and once it did that, the helmet would break off and he would just attack normally. Presumably, he was a melee character, judging by the lack of the signature boulder that they usually carry. We also know that this was not the bandit. As developers explained, it charged like a bandit, and this was supposed to come out in 2018 when the bandit had already been out for over a year. So with that said, we can rule out that this inspired the Bandit, Dark Prince, or the Battle Ram. This was supposed to be a thing of its own, but they explained that it was too OP, so they trashed it. Ancient Minion. This was another minion card that would only attack air and buildings, so it could not target ground troops, it would fly right past them. This was scrapped because it was way better than the Lava Hound, and they didn't want to make the Lava Hound obsolete, so they just scrapped the card. I guess its stats were very similar to a Lava Hound's, but better. We don't know what it looked like, but there is one minion concept in the Art of SuperCell book that stands out from the rest, though it is very possible that this is just an early concept of the Mega Minion and not the Ancient Minion, so we don't know. It might be, it might not, I don't know. Golemite Cave. We know of this Golemite Cave's existence because the actual cave was found in the game files all the way back in early 2016, and back then it was categorized as a building, so judging based off what we know, it looks like the Golemite Cave was going to be a spawner building that spawned Golemites. At some point, it was thought that this was a Ice Spirit hut, because Ice Spirit assets were also found at the same time, but it turns out these were just two separate cards. The Ice Spirits would release in the summer of 2016, but the cave would not. Here's a cool concept of how that may have looked like if it did release in an alternate universe, though just think of the golems being smaller. Caravan. The Caravan was a car that was, well, Caravan. These were the images that were shown of it. I assume these were just reference images, and in the bottom left probably what it looked like in the game. It is very possible that it was also being pulled by a horse based on the design. Although developers stated this card was going to release in 2018, this concept originated from 2015. Looks like they just revisited the idea years later. But it didn't work out, so they scrapped it. Again, based on what the developers were saying about it, it looks like this caravan spawned gnomes or something, which eventually led to the inspiration behind the skeleton barrel. It's quite interesting that this led to a flying barrel, but I guess mechanically they were very similar. The caravan also ended up inspiring another card, the Trojan Horse, which according to SuperCell was just an early version of the Goblin drill. But I thought it was interesting that this one concept of a caravan full of gnomes inspired two entirely different cards. Elite Barbarian Hut. In 2017, developers revealed that they had tested a spawner building for practically every card that existed at the time. What a scary thought. And one of those was the Elite Barbarian. Fortunately, it just seemed like they were messing around and it never made it past that stage. But it's crazy to know that this was even considered to begin with. Imagine a world where we've been dealing with the Elite Barbarian Hut for the past 10 years. Batter Goblin. This is not an official name, of course, just some stupid name I gave it based on what it looks like. It was a goblin that swung a bat, and it reminds me a lot of BB from Brawl Stars. Perhaps it had the same mechanics as well, where it swung the bat and then it pushed the troops forward, kind of like what BB does, well, exactly what BB does. It is also very possible that its design inspired the bandit, but just the design, because mechanically they are nothing alike. This goblin looks like it's swinging the bat like baseball, whereas the bandit just hits stuff with it, you know. Bat Nest. Unfortunately, we don't have much information about this one, but in 2017, references to a bat nest of sorts were present in the game files. However, that is literally all we know about it. The regular bats were released in 2017 as well, so maybe one of its early concepts was a nest that you deployed and it spawned the bats all at once or periodically. Although we don't have any art for this one, I did find a concept by ME Graphics that looks pretty cool and gives us a general idea of what it may have looked like. Portal Spell. This was a spell planned for 2016 that will let you place a ring that would open a portal on one lane of the arena and another portal would open on the other lane. And troops that walked into it would end up on the other lane, and it was kind of like a portal, I guess. I mean, the name says it. However, developers explained that they had to scrap it due to balancing issues. I have gotten comments in the past that this ended up becoming the Mighty Miner, but I think that's a bit of a stretch. The Mighty Miner is not opening a portal and transferring everything. He is just doing that himself. The spell, on the other hand, was capable of transferring your entire push onto another lane. It was gonna be pretty crazy. The Butterfly Spell. The Butterfly Spell was a spell set to release in 2016 that would deploy a ton of butterflies and it would distract troops for a few seconds. But the problem with this concept was not its mechanics, but its visuals. They had issues making it look and feel right. You know, all those tiny butterflies in the screen, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So although the card did work the way they wanted it to, they just couldn't make it look right. One thing led to another, and somehow this card inspired the making of the Tornado, which I guess is sort of similar. Not really, but I can see how that happened. The Mega Pekka. The Mega Pekka was a giant Pekka that had the wheels of a tank. According to developers in the VIDEOÄ podcast back in 2017, this one had many iterations. The first one was where it had infinite damage but low HP. The other was when destroyed it would spawn a mini Pekka. And the last one was that it couldn't be interrupted, so no matter what you did to it, it would still beeline toward the tower. Even though the Mega Pekka itself never came out, one of those iterations ended up inspiring the Super Mini Pekka that was available for a limited time for the Pancakes event back in 2022. It was also almost a boss in Clash Quest. However, that never made it out of the concept stage before the game got cancelled. Ice Dragon. All we know about the Ice Dragon is its in-game description, which read, spits a row of slowing attacks. This was likely an ice version of the baby dragon that had similar attacks as like the Azure dragon in Clash of Clans, if you remember that. Based on that description, it may have had like those same shots and they slowed enemies down. Minion Hive. If you play Clash of Clans, this one probably sounds very familiar because we have a literal building with the same name in the clan capital. And it turns out that this one may have done exactly what that one does per its description, which read, spawns minions quickly over a short period of time. Bear Trap. This wasn't a standalone card, but an asset that was found in the game files that was part of the original Hunter's concept. It was his trap before he had the shotgun and everything. We don't know exactly what the trap was for, but most likely he threw the trap with a rope, which was also found with it. And if a troop stepped on it, he would trap them and, you know, he could do some melee damage. Again, this was before he had a shotgun, he had a knife. The Hunter was never released with this mechanic. However, it did end up resembling kind of what the Evo Hunter does with his net. Not really, but I can see it. Anyway, I only wanted to mention this one because there were many speculations that traps were coming to Clash Royale, and there was like some mentions of them in the game files, but it turns out this was just a big misunderstanding. Hog Stables. There is very little information about this one, but its in-game description read, spawns royal hogs quickly over a short period of time. So the Hog Stables spawned hogs. Pretty cool. With these cards that we know very little about, it's unknown if they were supposed to be for a special challenge or a temporary card, a super card, but I have my bets on this just being something temporary. It doesn't sound like they would have added another spawner. Elixir Monster. I know what you're thinking, we already have this card, just stop talking about it. However, the concepts for the original Elixir Monster and what we currently have, the Elixir Golem, were very different. In fact, they were like the complete opposite in many ways. The 2016 version of the Elixir Monster was a Golem type card that would split into two, but if left unchecked, those two Golemites would grow back into full size, and then those could split into two as well, and it would just keep going on from there. Its in-game description read, Elixir Monster is a strong, gelatinous melee troop who splits into two elixir blobs upon death. Elixir blobs grow into half-size elixir monsters if left unchecked. The 2019 version, on the other hand, ended up being a golem that keeps splitting until it gets smaller and smaller, and these blobs give you elixir. As you can see, mechanically, they were nothing alike, and the 2016 monster version would have been chaotic, to say the least. And according to developers, it was a very scary card, so much that they joked about it being an 11 elixir card. But yeah, that is every kill card that we know of. There were certainly more that I considered adding to this list, like the Fire Knight, but that one just looks like the reworked Furnace, and there are a lot of examples like this, the Golden Knight, the Goblin Drill, and the Barbarian Launcher, which I originally had in this video due to it being a limited time card, but the more I thought about it, the more silly it felt to include that here, so I ended up removing it entirely. Anyway, with that said, hope you guys enjoyed, but hey, before you go, YouTube thinks you'll like this next video, so check it out. As always, see you guys in the next one. Peace.